19. Exemptions, doctors, conscience and the niqab. In some countries and at some times, women are conscripted and into armed forces, to fight for country and king, for dictator or democracy, yet in some countries and at some times exemptions are permitted on grounds of deeply held belief. Conscientious objectors may sincerely insist that, in all conscience, they cannot be engaged in the military. Catholic doctors, nurses and surgeons, in Britain at least, are permitted to refuse direct involvement in abortion procedures. It is their deeply held belief that such procedures lead to the destruction of at least potential persons, so they are allowed to discriminate against women needing that medical intervention. Adoption agencies of a Catholic persuasion would ideally accept only married heterosexual couples as adopting parents. The Catholic deeply held belief is that same-sex relationships provide no proper family home. Such agencies in Britain, though, have received no exemption from accepting homosexual couples as adopting parents. Is there not a puzzling inconsistency? Sikhs, because of their turban commitment, are exempt from crash helmet regulations. Employers revise their dress codes so that the religious may wear the yarmulke, niqab, burqa or crucifix. Yet the founder of the International Church of Judaism was prohibited from wearing his hooded headdress, despite claiming it essential to his newfound religion, and men would usually be prevented from wearing skirts, and women from wearing bikinis at city meetings. Mind you, perhaps that is not so puzzling. One may doubt the authenticity of Jihadistic belief. One may doubt the overwhelming importance to men of skirt wearing and to women of bikini wearing, when in most jobs, serving the public. Paradoxically, to promote equality, in employment and lifestyle opportunities, unequal treatment is required. Exceptions and exemptions are made, either in law or in practice, usually to accommodate religious beliefs. Yet what moral guidelines are there for permitting some exemptions, but not others? If doctors are permitted exemption from abortion work, why are adoption agencies refused exemption from accepting same-sex couples onto their books? If Muslim women are free to wear the burqa or niqab at work, ought not satirical atheists be free to wear T-shirts displaying cartoons of Muhammad? We are looking at justifying exemptions from legal requirements and duties of employment, requirements and duties from which normally we should expect no exemption. We seek moral justifications. What justifies which exemptions for which believers? A basic ethical intuition is that people should be free to express themselves, so long as not causing unwanted harm to others. The intuition presents an equality concerning respect, though it raises immediate problems. Why, for example, should not some bars, with smokers as employees, be exempt from anti-smoking laws, so that both smokers and non-smokers' lifestyles are respected? Let us focus, though, on exemptions sought because of people's deep values. A person's sense of identity may be tied to religious values and belief. Asking people to leave their belief in God at the door is akin to asking them to remove their skin color. Of course, atheists cannot shunt off atheistic beliefs as they enter employment, yet we may agree that the proposed atheist T-shirt above is discourteous, even inflammatory, and inessential to atheists' lack of belief. The niqab, burqa and similar, for many even some Muslims, are provocative and barriers to an integrated community, when worn within a secular society. Thus, France has a ban on face coverings in public, yet no ban on displaying the Christian cross or wearing the Jewish yarmulke. That manifests unfair discrimination, argue Muslims who disregard the integration barrier point, and when employers prohibit the niqab and similar, those Muslims insist that too is unfair, their religious views are being disrespected, with the resultant lack of employment opportunities that others enjoy. To secure those opportunities, these Islamic believers would need to leave their religious dress at the employment door, but that dress is essential to their lives. Addressing the alleged unfairness, we may note that, according to many experts on the Quran, the niqab and so forth are not required by Islam, so we may challenge the religious significance of the dress demand. Muslim women who insist on wearing such dress could be seen as disqualifying themselves from public employments. A response is that some women wear the niqab or similar through family pressure rather than genuine belief. If exemptions are disallowed, then those women would be all the more trapped, having to remain at home. The debate has hence moved into factual matters of belief sincerity and benefits for the women. Let us, then, focus on Muslims and other believers for whom their religious observances are justified as profoundly important, for, surely, any special exemptions from the norm minimally require deep belief sincerity. Were exemptions permitted, based on mere whims, we could be opting out of numerous requirements, from dress codes to vaccination practices. In societies that value diversity, conformity still has a place, in certain places. Many city offices require high collars and ties on men, while allowing low-cut blouses on women. Others insist on modesty in female dress. What is socially acceptable gradually changes, but, in the main, people acquiesce in numerous conventions, until in conflict with deep belief. The oft-made assumption that a religious basis is required for depth of belief, though, needs challenge. True, religious commitment can afford some evidence of depth, but so too can significant non-religious movements, sometimes for the good, maybe ecological movements sometimes for the bad, as with certain political creeds. With deeply held beliefs, people may sincerely claim that they could not live with themselves if engaging in certain activities. They may appeal to conscience, yet who knows what conscience reports? Were conscience or depth of belief sufficient to justify exemptions, deeply committed racists could use it to avoid anti-racist laws, and misogynist employers to justify paying women less than men. We need something more. For a start, the deeply held beliefs, the conscience consultations, must not be morally obnoxious. They must also, even if false, be understandable, as possessing deep importance for the believers. And sometimes they are. Even the most fervent admirer of just wars may respect people who judge war morally beyond the pale. Even the strongest defenders of women's rights may recognize that abortion poses genuine moral dilemmas. The grounds for exemptions related to war and abortion make recognizable moral appeals to how we should respect the lives of others. In such cases we should at least be receptive to the possibility of exemptions. The deeply held beliefs are clearly, other regarding, concern for protecting others. Of course, this does not remotely solve the puzzle of which exemptions, whether other regarding or merely concerning one's own personal salvation, should be permitted. Circumstances, for example, may be so desperate, too few soldiers, too few doctors, that the relevant exemptions cannot be granted. Practical considerations, though, sometimes boost granting the desired exemptions. Pacifists are unlikely to be good soldiers, but they may give excellent care to the war-wounded. Inevitably, competing and practical factors have to be weighed. Of course, some believers, if not exempted, may still refuse to do whatever it is to which they object. They may resign their posts, but, as a matter of fact, practical disadvantages can often cause deeply held beliefs to be less deep. People compromise, juggling principles with comforts. When considering how people with different entrenched beliefs can live together, there are bound to be gray areas. People and authorities need to adapt and adjust. Let us return to the adoption agency. The Catholic concern is genuinely other regarding. They want what they perceive as best for the children, but homosexual couples may see only homophobia in the Catholic stance. How ought we to view the problem? Assuming a sufficient number of secular adoption agencies, and a society which allows children to be religiously nurtured and taught, highly controversially, that certain sexual practices are immoral. Consistency would suggest that the required exemptions for Catholic agencies should be permitted. In the end, exemptions rest on practical and muddling considerations. This may disappoint some readers, but it is often a mistake to think that there must be a principle that is both right and also determines what should be done on every occasion. A war criminal's defense is sometimes, "I was just doing my duty." If the laws are so bad, exemption from duties is no longer the issue. What is wanted is civil disobedience, where we have to stand up and be counted, or, in the days of the CND, be counted while sitting down. But let us remember that old texts, just because they possess the accolade of holy, are not thereby reliable sources for when we should stand up or, indeed, sit down. 20. It's all relative, isn't it? An adulteress is stoned to death, a slow, painful and humiliating death in a country ruled under a version of Sharia law. In Britain today, no legal sanction is applied against adultery. Some people in Britain would consider her adultery immoral. Others, possibly including her husband, would not see anything wrong. In Europe, the US and elsewhere, the great majority of people would assess the punishment of stoning as horrendous and deeply wrong. Some say this shows that such matters are relative. What she did was wrong relative to her culture, yet not wrong or not so wrong, relative to modern Western culture. Relative to that country's Muslim morality and law, she was rightly punished. Many years ago, in a school debate, I spoke in favor of the motion, "Down with the mini skirt." Supporting the motion enabled me to engage in the schoolboy humor of the double entendre, "down with." At the time, miniskirts were fashionable. A few years later they were out. Fashions come and go as do words for the fashionable: chic, cool, groovy, trendy, wicked, with it. What we find attractive, daring, acceptable or offensive is relative to its context. Once, it is said, men swooned at the glimpse of a lady's ankle. Consider how red wine tasted to you as a child, nasty, with how it tastes now. Contrast the reactions to grilled canine blue served in Korea with those to the same dish served in Britain, to sexual relationships involving boys in ancient Athens with those to such relationships in the West today, or the reactions of Scots to bagpipe music with those of the English to such noise, sounds. Cultural relativists typically extend such relativities to moral ity. What is morally right or wrong is, they claim, relative to society. Expansive relativists, as I term them, expand relativity further, some even to all truths. They say, for example, God exists, is true for believers, but false for non-believers, or, the earth is flat, was true for most people in the Middle Ages, but is not true for us now. They may argue that when I try to say that something is true absolutely, that is, not relatively, all I am doing is saying what I believe. I cannot get out of my own skin and find out how things really are. Some relativists argue that there is no, really at all. It is all relative. Are all values and truths relative? Relativism, arguably, seems more persuasive when the seeming truths are to do with morality, with what we morally ought or ought not to do, than when those seeming truths are to do with the world around us. Moral relativism is supported by many Western secularists. Such relativists, considering the stoning discussed above, sometimes mistakenly infer that it is wrong for us to interfere with the practices of that other country. If that conclusion is put forward as a non-relative claim, namely, that interfering is wrong, full stop, then it contradicts the relativist's claim that all moral judgments are relative. Such relativists cannot consistently hold to their position. That is a clear reason to reject their relativism. Perhaps moral relativists are saying that it is wrong, relative to a group's values, presumably, their groups, to interfere with another country's relative values. If that is the story, I may find it interesting, but, as it is only a relative matter, on its own it provides me with no good reason to accept their values. Although relativism may seem naturally to go with a liberal toleration as far as possible, do not interfere with others, there is no good reason why. Relativists cannot coherently tell nations, sects or individuals that they are wrong, full stop, when they impose their values on others, for those nations, sects or individuals may well value the spreading of their relative values to others. That all moral judgments are relative does not justify our drawing the conclusion, even if taken relatively, that therefore we in this country ought not to interfere with the practices of another country, just as it does not justify drawing the conclusion that therefore we ought to interfere in the practices of another country. Once morality is taken to be relative, there is the question, relative to what? To the society in which we live. To subgroups, sects, political parties, unions, clubs, to which we belong. To some other authority. To me. Whatever the answer, we should then ask the relativists, is your answer just relatively true, that is, just true for you or your group? If it is, why should I pay attention to it? If not, then you are no true relativists. Students sometimes profess a belief in relativism. They confront the folly of their professing when it is pointed out that if they are right, they ought not to complain that it is wrong for me to give them low marks. Our essays are good, they insist. Absolutely, say I, but as absolute non-relative values do not exist, your essays deserve low marks, relative to how I feel right now. Many left-wing radicals are drawn towards moral relativism because they want to respect other people's cultural identities. This leads them into the quagmire of trying to square their relativism with their judgment, surely correct, that women ought not to be forced to be veiled, undergo genital mutilation or be literally stoned to death. Of course, let me hasten to add, there are many ills in Western societies. Women often feel pressured into having children, having a man or, indeed, having no man at all. Both men and women are often made to feel failures, these days in Britain, if not on career ladders or if lacking home ownership or needing to travel by bus. Respect for culture and tradition ought not to be taken to imply that all cultures and traditions should be respected. Such respect does imply that some respects are right absolutely, not merely relatively. A puzzle is where to draw the lines or, in fact, where to find the lines drawn. The ancient Greek sophist, Protagoras, is seen as the key source for fully expanded expansive relativism. Man is the measure of all things, he said. His position seems to be that what is true is always a matter of what is true for someone. There is no such thing as truth, full stop. A quick and correct response is to wonder about the status of Protagoras' claim, just as we should wonder about the status of any argument put forward to defend relativism. All truths are relative. Is that relative or non-relative? If the latter, then it is self-refuting, so we should reject it. If the former, if it merely means, for me, Protagoras, all truth is relative, we should answer, that is all very well, Mr. Protagoras, but why should we take any notice of what you say? After all, you're only talking about how things strike you, not thereby how they are. Mr. Protagoras stamps his feet and shouts, but I am the great Protagoras who has thought about these things and who has seen. At this he hesitates. What he needs to say to influence us he cannot consistently say, for he needs to say that his arguments are better than others and not merely relatively so for him. He needs to be saying that he has seen, the truth. Full stop. Place a moral relativist in front of a screaming, innocent child being tortured. Ask her if she still thinks that what is being done is only relatively wrong. Place an expansive relativist on the tracks before an advancing express train. Ask her if she really does think that it is only relatively true that she is about to die.